Wouldn't be the first time. Like I said, we keep it real casual, so things happen. All right, so we're live on YouTube now.
Product placement for Panera, by the way, right here.
There you go. I don't think I've ever had Panera coffee.
Well, this is the light. They were out of dark. This is only light, and at this hour in the morning, it ain't good enough. I'll tell you right now.
I hear you there. I was demoted to drinking the bean water from our office cafeteria. So.
Oh, really? When I first started, they had. Oh gosh, what was it called? I can't remember even the brand name, but it was just some awful. It was like take Maxwell House and take out anything that's good about it. You have this.
Yeah, we have a Torquay. I don't know if you've ever even heard of Torquay, but it comes in like pre-portioned pouches in a big sleeve, and
so they proudly proclaim our target audience is suckers in workplaces. Is that it?
Yeah, pretty much. Now I found, and I don't know how much you get into coffee, but I found a place in Chicago that will deliver the beans to your house, and it's probably the best I've ever had. It's called Dark Matter.
Oh, cool.
Which, having a bunch of sci-fi friends, like,
yeah, Dark Matter makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, get some street cred with those guys, but they also did some collaborations with some metal bands, and I'm a huge fan of metal music.
Yeah, it's funny how you can take any category of like products and apply some kind of pop culture overlay to it, and that just somehow that makes it take off. I mean, obviously it makes it take off for that slice of the world, but it's really kind of a cool. I know there's a place that that does coffee, and I can't remember what it's called now, but it's just all like scary brand name coffee, and it's kind of cool.
Brand coffee.
Yeah, I can't think of what it is. I almost never get emails from them. This is one of their problems. They don't reach out enough.
Gory Grounds?
No, although I haven't heard of that one.
There's Gory Grounds, Deadly Grounds. Wow, there's actually a lot of them.
I have to look that up.
Huh. I don't want to take up too much of your time looking up coffee grounds here, but
now, are we actually on now?
We're on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Are we like airing and people are actually getting bored by this so far?
There's 2 people watching. I don't think they're bored. They're used to kind of Corey and I get off topic. Like that's kind of, well, I do that a lot. I'm a product of my surroundings. I work in IT. I have technology everywhere. So I see a squirrel and I get off topic. So it's nothing new to our fans.
Okay, great.
I got to save this. I can look that up later. But yeah, if you're set, then we'll actually record the show and stuff. All the audio looks good over here. But cool.
Great.
Welcome to a special podcast of terror, I guess you could call it. We're doing an interview, which is new to me. I was explaining to our guest that this is not something I've ever done before in the strictest of senses. I mean, we interview people all the time, but we're going to try this. This is going to be something new. So we have Mark Ramsey, the host of the new, and that's not really new anymore. It's 3 episodes out, correct, already?
Yeah, 3 episodes out means it's no longer new. What kind of a situation are we in? When you put out 3 episodes and it's, well, that new TV series, 3 episodes deep, it's old hat now.
3 weeks old.
Let's move on to the next thing. Yeah. It's very internet.
Well, technically it's halfway over. So it's not new, it's halfway done. Actually. But
that's true. I think the beauty of it, though, is that it's going to be evergreen because even when it's over, it's new to you, right?
That's true.
If you haven't already listened to it.
That's true. I know we've mentioned it before, but the Inside Psycho podcast. Now, a couple months ago, we actually did Psycho on our podcast with Annie Ching and Christina Mueller. So it was really awesome to see this come full circle. And not only that you were willing to take time out of your very busy day, because your podcast is a lot cooler than ours.
No.
Talk to us.
It's a lot different.
It's very different. It's 2 very different worlds. But I was really impressed actually when you emailed me back the first time. I stopped what my wife was doing and I said, Mark Ramsey emailed me. And she was just like, wow, that's cool, I guess. And I'm like, no, we're gonna hang out on the internet. Oh, she knows. She was the one that actually told me about Inside Psycho.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to tell her to keep on spreading the word. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, she's a science nerd, so they're worlds don't overlap with ours as much.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
before we go ahead and get into it, do you want to kind of give everyone a kind of a background on what Inside Psycho is? And
Yeah. So, I don't know, about a year ago, I had this. I've always looked at the podcasting space and I said, there's a lot of stuff here, but I look at the top of the charts and I don't feel like it's America. I don't feel like every formula has been followed. Like there's a lot more content out there, a lot more different flavors of content out there, a lot more different approaches than what we see reflected in the charts and what people are consuming right now. Once you get around news, once you get around sports, once you get around conversational shows like this one, it's like the stuff isn't all that unique. There are a few storytelling ones. There are a few, there's a lot of true crime all of a sudden. Thank you, Serial. But I thought, well, what about the rest of everything people are interested in? One of the things I know people are interested in is movies. I'm interested in movies. I'm on the board of the Broadcast Film Critics Association. Every year we do the Critics' Choice Awards. This past year on A&E. And I thought, well, how do I kind of graft that interest onto this space, this platform, which I understand, I have some experience in? How do I bring those two things together? And I thought, what's the perfect movie to start with? I mean, I'm a horror fan, I'm a movie fan, and I know how to find a good story. And when you look at the story behind Psycho, I mean, there's many movies in the genre that have compelling stories, but Psycho is one of the earliest for which we have a lot of scholarship and a lot of information about what went on behind the scenes, and it's really pretty amazing. And I thought, this is such a cool story. Let me try and tell this in 6 chapters, because that seems like a good number. I actually, when I said it was 6, I had no idea what that meant. I had done it. The show was sold on the basis of the teaser, which is 6 minutes long. And they said, yes, let's do it. I said, well, how long is it going to be? And I said, 6 chapters. And how long is each chapter going to be? And I said, 20 to 30 minutes. So I just made it up. And so then once I got into writing it and realized that what people didn't tell me was that this means you actually have to write like 180 pages of content, 2 hours of content, because it's all scripted. And that's another thing about it. It's not like a typical storytelling podcast where you've got some guy telling a story with an audio bed. This is fully produced. This is immersive audio. I intended this to be more like a movie without pictures than a podcast with a soundtrack and a narrator. I intended it to be what I'm referring to it now as kind of an audio graphic novel, because it's a lot of short little vignettes that take you all the way through before, during, and after the story, and telling the story in a really enlightening way. And I really think that whether or not you're a nut about Psycho, whether or not you're a nut about Hitchcock, it doesn't matter. If you like the genre, if you like the story, if you are the kind of person who's a creator, someone who likes to make stuff, someone who puts their music into the world, or their writing into their world, or their blogs into their world, or their IT into the world, their coding. If you put your own stuff into the world and you invest in it and you take a chance on it, you will appreciate this show. Because what I realized as I was writing it was that the story of Hitchcock is that story. It's the creator's story. It's the story of a guy who was famous, but he decided to do this movie that everyone around him told him not to do. His studio said they're not interested in it. They hated the idea. They thought it was beneath him. They thought it was a B movie, and they wouldn't do it. That's why he ended up at Universal. He had to put his own money into it, which means he took all the chance. So here he was at this kind of mature stage of his career. He was like 56 years old at this point, and he had to put his own money into this movie and take a chance with a movie that everyone told him would be beneath him at a time in his career when he really couldn't afford it, because he was on top. That's not usually a time when you take a big risk. It's usually the time when you play it safe if you're in the movie industry. And here he was doing this thing. And what happened to him, what I think makes the story so compelling, are the parts you haven't heard yet. The next part dropping on Thursday is the part that covers the second half of production and the shower scene and all that. So that's kind of the benchmark part. And the title for that chapter is "Men Do Kill Nude Women, You Know." So I suspect it'll get a lot of traffic for that reason alone.
If you're watching the video live, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if you're watching the video live, that will be 2 days from now. If you're listening to this when it comes out on iTunes and everything, that'll actually be today.
Okay, somehow we're both in the future and the present and the past all at the same time. That's the beauty of it. So anyway, the latter chapters, though, the second to last, 5 and 6. 5 is, you know, the release and the critical reception, which was very mixed. A lot of people hated it. And the audience reception, which was wildly positive. And then the problem, the biggest problem that Hitchcock had, which is, how does he top it? It's the biggest movie of his career, and he's faced with the problem. Everyone looking to him, how do you top it? And then you add that to the challenges he had, not only trying to top it and failing, but the fact that despite all his success, he was never given the recognition that he felt, and a lot of people felt he deserved by his peers. He never won an Oscar for his work. He won an honorary Oscar, which is, you know, not viewed the same way. And he won a Life Achievement Award at the very, very end of his life. And I tell that story. So this whole arc of Hitchcock, he comes in, you know, guns blazing, ready to create this cool thing that he believes in, that everyone says is crazy, but he believes in it. He takes a chance on it. It's a wild success. And then he has to deal with the fact that he can't figure out how to recover from it, how to repeat that success. And ultimately, the industry looks down on their noses on him anyway. So that's why it's such an interesting story. It's his is the hero's story. You know, his is the creator's story. And anyone who's ever made something and put it out into the world in the hopes that it hits, and if they're lucky enough to have it hit, they will know exactly how he feels.
Wow, that's insane. I'm up to date on it. So it was really interesting as a consumer of your content to hear more about Alfred Hitchcock than just The Birds and Psycho. And you know what I mean? Like, at face value, I'm really pretty young to be in the know on Alfred Hitchcock. But I'm old enough that it's not that far off. So to hear like the scene that you did, and I don't want to ruin anything for anyone that hasn't listened to it, but the scene in which you talk about his death, was really cool. Just the way that it was done, and to learn actually how he passed away, because I had no idea. He just died one day. So it was really cool. Now, my first question to you is, since you mentioned you're a horror fan, obviously you're doing a Psycho podcast. How did your love for horror kind of start?
Wow. I was a monster kid. It's that simple, you know. I mean, it's generations of people started that way. Whether it's, you know, I was the kid who had the haunted house in his basement that, in my case, nobody went to. I got something to prove with the podcast. So, but you know, I loved all that stuff as a kid. I love it today. You know, it's stayed with me. I've got every, you know, Universal movie in my collection. I've introduced my wife to all the Hammer movies, and she's into that now. We've going through all 3 Blu-rays of Vincent Price, the Vincent Price collection. So all the old stuff as well as the more contemporary stuff. You know, I think that the premium stuff that's coming out now, a lot of the Blumhouse stuff is awesome, and it's a genre that is all about kind of release and both pleasure and torment at the same time. And it's you know, and so I think from the very beginning, and you know, that whole Monster Kid evolution dates to a time when you know, these were all like rebels, you know, rejects, ostracized people who had feelings too, right? The Mummy, the Werewolf, all these guys, they had feelings too. The original Frankenstein, which people really should go back to, just for that one scene when Karloff is doing the thing with his hands, is just so affecting. So from that point to now, and I was super young then, obviously, but it still motivates, and I still am attracted to it. And I think that, you know, that one of the things I wanted to do with this show was reach beyond kind of the genre fans into the broader category fans and tell a story that was more universal. I mean, the best stories are Universal stories, right? I don't mean Universal Studios. The best, I definitely don't mean Universal Studios. The best stories are Universal stories. And that's why, you know, the process of this inside cycle thing is not a, you know, linear retelling beginning to end. Not at all. Hitchcock dies in part 2, you know, but then suddenly he's back to life for the rest of part 2. So it's not at all linear. It's not just the facts. It's not a Wikipedia entry. It's not radio theater. It really is audiographic novel, and it's intended to tell a story that's bigger than the genre. So I hope what people find, I hope what your wife finds, what you find, and what your fans find, is that when you listen to this, gosh, this is something that I relate to on a level that's deeper than my affection for Hitchcock, for horror, for Psycho, for movies. It's something deeper. It's about making something and taking a chance, and then dealing with the consequences of success and failure, because the consequences of both, it turns out, can be really challenging.
So now your podcast is, I hate to use the term heavily produced, but it's heavily produced. You know, we do minimal editing here, so I guess I'm curious, roughly how much time do you spend with the sound production and everything per episode?
Well, okay, so my team is really a team of 2, not counting the folks at Wondery. This is a I should say, when we pitched this, we pitched it to Wondery. Wondery is one of the main podcast platforms, and we picked Wondery because Wondery, the guys there come from Fox TV. So they come from a television mindset. They come from a storytelling mindset, a beginning, a middle, and an end mindset. I deliberately wanted to create something that had a linear arc to it, not something that was designed to be presented every single week. And once you get to this week's, last week's is now disposable. I wanted a story that lived on, like television. So I teamed up with a guy named Jeff Schmidt, who is an audio production whiz. And this was something he felt passionately about, as I did. He said, you know, you're going to have to write this for audio. And I said, I know, I'm going to write it for audio. So I wrote it for audio, and he brought all the flavor to it. So he created all that texture based on the work. You know, I did my audio, I laid down my audio first, my narration and hosting first. And then he brought all the magic to it. And that kind of collaboration is really what makes it so amazing. There's never more than, I mean, at one point we used a third voice, but it's almost all me. And the production is all Jeff. And those two things really came together. But one of the things we set out to do was to demonstrate how powerful audio can be in a world that has forgotten how powerful audio can be. I mean, audio is a more intimate sense than video. Yeah, video is more popular. Video is way easier to consume because a picture is literally worth 1,000 words, and it takes 1,000 words to communicate a picture, which means it's harder. It's, you know, it's just more time consuming. It's more trouble. It's more work. That's always going to make audio kind of a stepchild of video. However, audio has a power all its own. And when you're walking around, when you're on a treadmill, when you're, you know, on a bus, on your way to work, on a bike, whatever, and you put those earbuds in and you listen to Inside Psycho, you, I think, will be transported to the middle of the experience. You're not listening to a story. You're not hearing an audio bed, and it is not a friggin' audio book. Because audiobooks are the worst, in my opinion, in that regard, in that it's just some guy, maybe a celebrity, maybe the author, reading the book with no anything in the background. It is, you know, you might as well go to the Barnes and Noble to a book reading. It's the same experience. So that's how we did it, and that's why we did it. We set out to prove a point. And what Jeff put in was, I mean, the teaser alone, which is 5 to 6 minutes long, that's 5 hours of audio production.
That's insane. I could not imagine ever doing that.
Neither could I, which is why I have Jeff.
Fair enough, and that makes perfect sense. Now, do you have like a normal 9-to-5 job, or is Inside Psycho kind of your thing, your project right now?
Oh no. My work is in the audio space. So I work with broadcasters. I work with people in the podcast space. I've worked with Apple before, and I do marketing strategy
Okay.
and research for people in that space. So, I'm kind of a guy who's been around the audio space forever, and I've especially been around the radio space forever. And if ever there's a space which should understand and leverage the power of audio, that is it. So this is also kind of an illustration to them to say, look what you can do if you set out to do it.
That's impressive. It is very impressive, the amount of effort and how deeply you're into this, which is cool. It's always nice to see other creators of content that are very passionate about what they're doing. So I can appreciate that.
That was one of the things they told me. I said, they don't, that's the great thing about working with Wondery is they didn't say, why don't you do, why don't you do Texas Chainsaw Massacre instead? They said, well, if this is the one you're passionate about, let's do it and give it your all. And I think that's the key. You give it your all, you put it out there, you give it the best chance for success. And then you wait and see what happens. But this is, I think, designed to be kind of an illustration of just how powerful the audio can be. And the fact that it's genre is intentional, because if you go back to even old radio theater from the 30s and 40s, some of the most effective shows in that era, the Arch Oboler shows, were horror, were genre. And it's because, it's just like movies, right? What makes Jaws so successful? The fact that the shark, the damn shark was broken all the time and it never worked. As a result, you never saw it, right?
Yep.
So the less you see, the better it is. You see this play out in, the Blumhouse movies right now, the good ones, where you actually don't see stuff a lot. And that old kind of thing of open the refrigerator, close the refrigerator, oh, there's something on the other side of the refrigerator. You don't see that in those movies. They generally don't do that. That's kind of a, we've moved on past that. And now there's much more respect for the things that lurk in the shadows, the things that you can't see. And I think that is, if you're going to talk about one area where audio can excel, it's that, because it's all about pictures you make in your own head.
Now, you mentioned doing 6 episodes at roughly 20 to 30 minutes a piece resulted in 2 hours worth of page writing, essentially. Now, having finished the podcast, do you wish it was longer or shorter? I mean, obviously, I'm sure that.
You know what? I think it's just right, I have to say. My intention was to be between 20 and 30 minutes because I wanted each chapter to be the length of a commute, the length of an average commute. And that was intentional. There were other things I did in this that I think were intended to be deliberate. I opened, there was conversation about opening with last time on Inside Psycho, and I didn't want to do that, because, I wanted to open with new information, because I figure anybody who wants to know what happened last time can go to the feed and listen last time. Why you'd want to pop in at episode 4 is beyond me anyway. Unless you're coming in because the word nude is in the title. That's a different story. So I didn't want to do that. And I wanted to end, and they said, well, end with next week on Inside Psycho. And I said, let me do it a little differently. Let me work the tease for what's coming into the actual end of the episode. I mean, I was listening to episode 3, which is, as of this recording, the latest one out. And the last minute and a half of the episode is talking about the setup for the shower scene and how that was really the centerpiece of the movie. And Hitchcock was betting everything on it. And if it failed, it would be all on him. And next time on Inside Psycho, I mean, that's more the kind of setup that I'm interested in. So when you wrap all that up, I mean, I think 20 to 30 minutes is about right. What I didn't realize was that it would amount to 180 pages of text when I'm writing it. That was a bit of a surprise, but it was, I think, again, so few of these shows are like written that way, unless they're a journalism show, which is a whole other animal, that it was kind of fun to kind of write this story and make it kind of quasi-dry. I mean, there are recreations where I play both parts because I didn't want to do radio theater. I didn't want to have other characters interacting, because it just takes people out of the experience, I thought, and it tries to push a genre on people which hasn't been something they understand in 40 years, 50 years. So forget that. I wanted it to be utterly contemporary and really tell the story in a way that more like reading a storybook. You know, if you have a child, you read a storybook, you read all the roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
You read the queen, you read the ogre, you read both. So that's how it's, you know, it's the difference is that it's also heavily produced. There's another difference too that you haven't touched on, and that is, and I think you're deep enough to hear it, but there are illustrations of facts that are, you know, that take creative license. It's no different from a biopic, right? If I had a movie, you wouldn't say, well, is this a obviously it's a documentary. No, it's a movie. It's not a documentary. This is not a documentary. This is an audio movie.
That's a good way to describe it. When you were talking about creative license, the scene I instantly thought of was when you're describing being inside of Ed Gein's house. And I don't know, it's terrifying to me. And I don't live that far away. I've grew up around Ed Gein and on Jeffrey Dahmer and all of that. But still, just the way that you described it really made me feel like I was standing there, which I thought was really impressive. Because, I mean, I listen to and watch stuff all the time, and not everything really gets me the way that your description of that house did.
Yeah, what we did was I had this idea to, you know, since the Ed Gein murders in Wisconsin were, for anybody who doesn't know, the primary inspiration for the Norman Bates character for Robert Bloch when he wrote the book. So the first chapter, the first part of the story is kind of the Ed Gein story, front to back. And I had this idea of kind of telling the story of what people found at his house and in all its horrors by essentially taking a tour of his house before the cops get there. So that was the story, you know, that here we are, welcome to Ed Gein's house. Let's take a tour around. We'll describe what you're seeing. So that was kind of the artistic way of approaching that. I could as easily have said, and here's what the cops found when they get there. And to me, that would have been more lifeless. It was more interesting kind of discovering it with the audience rather than telling the audience what we discover. And that's, again, an illustration of the power of the medium. And, you know, audio can do, and I say this to you, I say this to anybody who's watching or listening, I say this to people in radio and podcasting, and I say this to people in the advertising space. Audio can be amazingly powerful, but you have to expect more from it. And then you'll get more from it.
That's awesome. It's so impressive because I'll listen to audiobooks. I drive to Milwaukee a lot. It's a 2-hour each way commute, and I don't like reading based on what I was explaining to you before about how I very something new happens, I switch. So audiobooks kind of help to keep me focused, and I never really thought about what was actually missing when you just have someone reading vanilla words on a page versus someone actually creating a scene with words and sounds. So now you've ultimately ruined audiobooks for me.
Well, I hope not. But they will
fine.
never, I will tell you, they will never put this much investment into an audiobook as we put into this. So I hope that's why I really hope that as time goes by, and especially I think once we get to the fall, I think it's very likely that Inside Psycho is going to have a second life when we hit October and you know, people are looking for this kind of stuff, because I mean, it really does, you know, there's a reason why all the good horror movies come out in October and the other ones come out in January. There's a reason for that, and it's because, you know, you match kind of the appetite with the time in which people most want that experience. And I you know, in this case, the thing wasn't done in time for last Halloween. It was done right around the end of the year. You know, there's no sense in keeping it in the can for 10 months. So we put it out. If we do a second season, so far the signs are that we will. We'll be choosing a different movie, and the goal will be to have it ready in time for Halloween.
Well, you're very good at answering questions that I plan on asking in the future. But I guess with there being 3 episodes left, what can people kind of expect for the rest of this season of Inside Psycho?
Well, let's assume that those people aren't caught up yet. So the first one is the Ed Gein story. The second one is kind of introducing you to the author of the book Block and Hitchcock, and telling some of those stories about how Block, what after he wrote this based on the clippings that he saw of the Plainfield massacres, he was stunned by how close to life his concoction, Norman Bates, was to the real guy, Ed Gein, and he had to wonder what was it inside of him that created that out of nothing, when in fact it was so true to life. And then come to find out, his book gets optioned by this mysterious Hollywood director for next to nothing, which turns out to be a guy with plenty of money, Alfred Hitchcock. And then we tell the Hitchcock backstory, including a couple of funny anecdotes. I saw somebody the other day. I was in Los Angeles, and a guy approached me. We were supposed to have a meeting, and a guy who's an actor in LA, he approached me and he said, the star of Lifeboat, she didn't wear any underwear. And I said, well, he obviously listened to part 2. And then part 3 is, casting the movie, making the movie, and the origin of the voice of Norman Bates' mother, which is a great story, because I actually talked to the guy who was that voice.
Oh, wow.
Technically, there are 3 voices used in the movie as Norman Bates' mother, but the guy who started it all, and the guy whose voice is mixed in, was a friend of Anthony Perkins back in the day. And I tell the story, I show the story, I illustrate the story of them prank calling movie stars, which is what they did. And his friend Paul Jasmine used this older woman's voice. And Tony just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. He recorded all this stuff, and he would play it for all his friends. And one of the people he played it for was Alfred Hitchcock, and Hitchcock liked it so much, he said, that's the voice of Mother. So that story is in part 2, and then, or part 3. Part 4 is the last half of the making of the movie, including the shower scene and the music and the design and all that. 5 is the release, where there was a lot of anxiety. And the reviews, which were, as I say, very mixed, and the audience reception, which was great. And then 6 is really kind of what happened next. It's the legacy of the movie, which is astonishing. I mean, the number of characters named Loomis in movies. I mean, can we even count them? It's getting ridiculous. I might as well change my name to Loomis at this point. There should be Loomis and Loomis. That should be the name of this show right there.
There you go.
That's a great podcast, Loomis and Loomis. And what the movies owe to that. But then, more interestingly, again, the Hitchcock story. What happened to him after, how he had to, face up to, everyone said, how are you going to top it? And he was just like, how am I going to top it? And how Hollywood, declined to give him the Oscar for that movie or any other. How he got the honorary Oscar, and he was, insulted by it. How he got the Life Achievement Award when his life was almost months from ending. And what he owed to his wife. And my favorite part of the series is in that final part. When I show the story of him accepting the Life Achievement Award from the Hollywood Life Achievement Award. And in his comments, essentially focusing solely on his wife and thanking her for being with him for all of his adult life. And that the heart of that one moment is, for me, the best part of all 6 episodes. That 2-minute segment in part 6 is the money shot. It's the best part of all 6 episodes, because it is the emotional core of Alfred Hitchcock. And it's and I think anyone who has a spouse standing by them as they go through thick and thin, supporting them, helping them, being their partner in life, will really relate to that moment. And that's why it's bigger than an anecdote. It's bigger than a story. It's bigger than one movie. It's bigger than Hitchcock. It's bigger than the genre. It's bigger than movies. It's about, who we are as humans. And that's the kind of universal story worth telling. And that, I hope, is what people get out of this series when all is said and done.
If you haven't been convinced yet to listen to this podcast, I feel like you just sold it to anyone that's on the fence. You just sold it with that little speech right there. Terrific. Well, I know you're super busy, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But do you want to? Where can people find you on social media, the podcast, and all that good stuff?
Well, Inside Psycho is the show, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. It's a Wondery show, so you can find out more at InsidePsycho.com. We'll take you right to the Wondery site. Wondery's a great group of people, and they have a lot of good shows, by the way. And on Twitter, it's at Inside Psycho, and Facebook, it's just /Inside Psycho. And I'm all over the place. You can Google me. I'm at Mark Ramsey Media, and I couldn't be happier to be on this show and talking to you and your audience. So thank you for doing this. You don't need to take the time, and I appreciate it.
No, it's like I explained to you earlier. It was really impressive that someone of your stature, now granted, I'm just a little guy and you're a medium size. You know what I mean? It's all a matter of perception.
What am I going to do for an encore? See, I got to face that problem.
And that's where I'm going with this. Is I hope that when the second season comes out, we get an exclusive. You can come on here, you can announce it to the world. It'll be a big thing. But honestly, when you do have your second season or whenever you want to come back, you have my email. Just get a hold of me. We'd love to have you.
I appreciate that, and I'm surprised and impressed that you didn't ask me what the movie for the second season was going to be, because I wouldn't tell you anyway.
Well, I was going to, and then when you started to talk about the second season, I knew you weren't going to allude to what it was, so I'm like, why even bother? That's like we had Randy Greenback as the executive producer for the Friday the 13th video game on a couple months ago, and he continually gets asked when the release date is. Yeah. And he just keeps saying early 2017, and this was back in December, and I was just like, when's it coming out? He just said early 2017. I'm like, well, whatever. We're hanging out. If you're not going to tell me, then yeah. Well, fingers crossed that it comes out eventually. But
yeah, that's a good movie. If it goes on long enough, I'll get to that one, because there are a lot of stories with Friday the 13th. That's for sure.
And unfortunately, the rebootish remake got canned.
Yeah.
Which is
there's still Halloween though. Don't forget, there's still Halloween.
Oh, trust me, there's a lot. And with the remake of It coming out, I'm sure there's a story
about the remake movie Halloween.
Oh, yeah, well,
there's still that.
We started with that one.
Well, I don't know.
We talked about it because it could really be hit or miss. It could be great.
Be hit, it could be missed. That's
yes.
right.
That's the problem. I had high hopes for the last remake of Friday the 13th, and it did not live up to.
You know what? Just one quick anecdote, and again, I'm older than I look. Although maybe not, I don't know. But I remember being a kid, being in the audience for Halloween round 1.
And see, that's why I wish I was older, so I could do stuff like that.
Well, my point is, you cannot recreate that moment with that franchise. Exactly. You can't. I mean, I remember being in the theater with a bunch of friends, and the reaction in that theater for the original movie Halloween, John Carpenter, 1978, was crazy. And you can't just say, oh, well, we'll just apply a new twist and then we'll restart. We will recreate that experience all over again. You can't do it. You can find a new way into it. You can make a profitable movie out of it. You can even potentially restart the franchise, but you can't recreate that moment in history. And every generation has that moment, whether it's Friday the 13th, which had its own terrors. I remember I was way too old for Last House, or way too young for Last House on the Left when it was in its first incarnation. But I remember going to one of those midnight showings, and it's like the people walking out of. I think we walked out. It was just unbearable to experience. Now it's like, yeah, okay, I get that. Last House on the Left, no problem.
Yeah, my mother-in-law has
recreate that.
Yeah, my mother-in-law has explained to me when she went to see The Exorcist in the movie theater, and like how that was, and people getting up and leaving, and I'm like, that just doesn't happen anymore. You have the row of kids in front of you on their cell phones, and then the 2 rows over are talking nonstop, and it's really difficult to get immersed into a movie.
And by the way, that's one of the things with Psycho. It was a marketing thing as much as it was a film thing, and Hitchcock got very deep in the marketing of it. That's part 5, in terms of all the lobby cards and the stand-ups and the very unique trailer where he took you on a tour. That he kind of did in the trailer what I did in part 1 at the Gein House. He took you on a tour of the set and the house and all that, without showing you or telling you much of anything. And so it really, again, you know, how he, and that was also a time when people commonly went to the movies in the generic. You know, where are you going? What movie are you going to see? I don't know. Whatever's there. We're going to go to the movies. Well, when does it start? Well, that doesn't matter. We're going to the movies now. You know, we're going to be in the middle, and then we'll just stay until we get to the middle of it again on the second showing. And that's what people did at that time. And it wasn't until Psycho where he set down a rule with the theater owners and said, if you don't come in at the beginning, you don't come in at all. And the theater owners were like, whoa, we don't want to turn people away at the box office. But that was a time when people literally didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
They came in during the middle of the movie all the time. That's the way it worked. But he was so insistent that he didn't want anyone to miss anything, that he didn't allow that. And he especially didn't want anyone, you know, if you see the end before seeing the first 3/4, you know, something is clearly lost. So it made no sense for you to see the end of Psycho and then roll back and see the beginning. I mean, who would do that?
See, I couldn't fathom like watching the middle of a movie through the end and then starting it over.
See what I mean?
Pieces, yeah, putting the pieces together.
But culturally speaking, you know, once upon a time, people did it all the time.
They didn't have the movie phone guy.
It was well before that movie phone guy. Yeah. And that was 1960 changed all that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you again. It was an honor to be here and talking with you. So once, like I said, whenever you want to come back, you just let me know.
Always happy to do it. Thanks so much. And I hope that tons of people watch this and listen to it. So you run the audio on your podcast? Is that what the plan is?
Yep. The way we do it is we'll record like we're doing right now, and then I'll kind of level it out, throw bumpers on it, and then it'll come out on iTunes and everything.
Great.
This being not a normal episode, we do little extra ones.
Abnormal episode.
I don't want to say it's abnormal. It's still on topic. It's just less than the normal structure. So this will come out in addition to the episode that came out today as of recording it. So you get your own thing.
Okay.
I hope that this benefits you as much as it benefits us.
I hope so. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. No,
exactly. It's a give relationship here. I want to help you out.
But sincerely, I am thrilled to talk to an enthusiast who's into the project and into the genre. I don't get enough opportunities to do that. If someone out there is listening who can make sure I get Comic-Con tickets, my email is markramsey@mac.com. But if not, this is as close as I'm going to get, because I'm being in that waiting room for Comic-Con. For some reason, my number is I always draw a really high number. And my days of free passes are apparently over. So, such is life.
Maybe you'll end up on your own panel for your podcast.
Well, if they do a podcasting panel, I would be very open to that invitation.
See, I don't know how Comic-Con works. That is on two different sides of the country than I live in. We didn't cheese a con.
I'd invite you to come out and see it, but that would only take yet another ticket away from me.
No, don't worry about it. Bucket list to get there someday, but yeah, such is life.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. We'll be in touch about the next season, so make sure you check out Inside Psycho, catch up, stay tuned, and then harass Mark about the second season. All right, man. I got the audio, so